Today I'm going to be sharing 5 creative ways to use napkins. Using a patching technique to apply napkins on any surface is extremely beginner friendly. Walmart has a bunch of ceramic pieces for a decent size and a decent price. This was $3.94 and I love owls, so home it came and we're about to get to business with this little piggy bank. First things first, I took its little plug out of the bottom of it there, and I gave it a nice coat of white matte paint. And painting it is completely up to you. The napkin I'm using has a white base and I want it to be flawless between the napkin and the color of the owl. As you can see here, there is a slight variation in the color between the original and adding the white paint. This beautiful napkin I picked up recently at TJ Maxx and I knew exactly what I was going to use this for. I could not wait to get this napkin on here. What I was really surprised at, which is not often, is how big the napkin was and the fact that the pattern carried on for almost the entire napkin. I loved having so much of this print to be able to mess with, and I had the whole other side of the napkin left as well, so I just stashed that away for another DIY. You know what I'm saying? We just hold on to it and hoard it until we need it again. When you're working with a piece like this, there are many ways you can attack it, but for me, I knew that I wanted this to be decoupaged in the direction that makes sense when you stare at a piece. So I wanted the head to be decoupaged a certain way, the belly, the back. I wanted the print to actually face naturally the way that I think it would if I'm staring at it. I hope that makes sense. So for me, I had to make sure that I was applying the exact sections of this napkin in the exact places and then piecing together certain parts because I didn't want to just apply the whole print over the whole ceramic piece. And in order for me to be able to accomplish this the way that I envisioned it, there were several steps I had to take. One was getting rid of the edge of this napkin. On almost every single napkin, it has this little edge. And usually I leave them and don't fuss over them at all. But for this particular thing, since we're going to be glossing this, I wanted to make sure everything was flawless and we could not tell where the napkin began and our ceramic piece started. For our medium, we're going to be using Mod Podge Gloss, and for the application, I'm using a fan brush. I'm a huge fan of the fan brushes because I'm able to use them to kind of smush in between and double check making sure if our napkins get attached really well. And to help us accomplish this, to make sure that all the pieces are pressed in really well, we're going to use a bunched up little piece of cling wrap. This is going to really smooth out our napkin and make sure it gets in all the little grooves that are on our piggy bank. I cannot stress enough how this should be done in tiny sections. Once you get this tiny little spot I'm doing right here attached, you're going to then flip the napkin up and see how little bit that I just did in that little spot, and you're going to carry on. If you want to just slap your napkin on here, do the whole thing, you go right ahead. But if you want a flawless look, and when you see the end result, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. You want a flawless look, you do this piece by piece and section by section. And as you're going through with this right here, you're going to see where you can naturally tear this and bend it around the grooves that are in the porcelain piece. And I highly recommend checking the edges of the napkin as you go. Before you start removing the excess of the napkin, make sure that it's dry because we're going to be using water on the edge of a paintbrush to find those natural creases where you ended your Mod Podge and tear this. The napkin will gently pull away from the section that does not have any Mod Podge on it. And you want to also make sure that you're not applying the water on the napkin where the Mod Podge is. It will reactivate the Mod Podge if it is not waterproof Mod Podge, and this wasn't. So I wanted to make sure that I clarify that before you guys are like, let me just paint it over here and then tear it. It will tear in the wrong spot. So definitely be very ginger doing this. And in case you're wondering, because I did not speed up this section, it took me over 3 hours to create this little piece with the decoupaging. I take my decoupage art very seriously. But on a side note, I have not made one of these for you guys. I have been asked to make one of these for all of you. If you enjoyed this piece, let me know in the comments below. I have a ton of ceramic pieces I'd love to get my hands on and decoupage with you. Also, be mindful because it will stick to your fingers like it's going there. The napkin bits will break off if you have Mod Podge on your hand. For the front of the face and the sides of the face, I wanted to make sure that they weren't completely covered by the florals, and that the florals, like I said in the beginning, were facing the proper way when you're looking at the piece. So this way you didn't look at it and see upside down flowers or anything like that, or too many. You could differentiate the fact that there were eyeballs right there, there's a nose, there's a belly. So I just carefully placed certain pieces of the napkin and then moved forward with that. I did the same thing with the belly and pieced it together as well. And this cling wrap, just kind of using that to attach, it really gets in the grooves so perfectly. I let this dry for about 30 minutes and then came back in with our paintbrush with a little bit of water and went around all the ends of the napkin where I did not have any Mod Podge and remove the excess. And you're going to want to take your time with this because you're going to notice that certain little sections of the napkin will bunch where the water and the Mod Podge meet, and you're going to just kind of pull that apart. You can use a fingernail or a clay tool to do that, so this way it's a smooth transition from the napkin to the piece. And then you can take a little bit of Mod Podge like I'm doing here on a tiny paintbrush and going in those grooves to just kind of fold out the napkin to just blend in the creases, and it just looks so amazing. Now you noticed I didn't decoupage the feathers, right? That's because we're going to use some mica powder in these two little paintbrushes. One's for the mica powder, this one right here, and the other one is for some brown paint we're going to use to go in between the feathers. I decided, so mica powder is definitely messy to work with, be mindful, but I wanted some shine. And these have a really nice shine on them that kind of just pops out with a little bit of like, I don't know, like a silver going on, like a glitter. You know what I mean? So I really just wanted to add a little bit of something. I did leave some of the feathers white, so this way it blended in with the whole piece. I used a couple colors that match the napkin, of course, and how dark you want these really just depends on how much you kind of smear in your colors. Now, obviously, you've seen all the powder. I was like, I was blowing it off as I went. I let this sit for a couple minutes and then came back in with some of that white paint and just tied in between where the napkin ended and some spots that I felt like the mica powder made a little bit of a mess on. And then in the process of all this, decided against the brown and then used the green. And honestly, I don't think it mattered because it turned out looking black to me for the feathers. You could leave it as it is, but I wanted to add this in here just to give a little bit of pop in the feathers, but get some unity as a whole, that they were kind of all connected. And people, your lines don't need to be perfect. You know what I'm saying? Just smoosh it on in there because we're going over this anyway. Once I was finished with this, I took a little bit of that white paint on my finger and then did a dry brushing over all the feathers to kind of just blend this in. And then I let that dry and took some of Dixie Belle's gold gilding wax and gave all of the feathers and the little feet a gentle little smoosh. The right color napkins can blend perfectly into wood itself without using any base paint underneath. I grabbed several of these large cutting boards at Dollar Tree. They were only $3. They look amazing on their own, but we're gonna decoupage this one in a very unique way. Normally I'd paint over this gem and call it a day, but we're gonna actually sand off the design. That's right. This is going to just sand right on off of here. It's going to take a little bit of elbow grease, and it started making a bit of a mess. So, you know, I retreated to the patio. And just in case you're wondering, I'm using 120 grit. The lower grit on the sandpaper, the more coarse it is. The higher grit, the smoother it is. The more coarse it is, gives you the ability to really knock off any print like this. And people, since it was 120 grit, this is a little rough, you know what I'm saying? But I had to be careful because guess what? This is not solid wood. It's MDF, okay? Check out the back, all right? This is a huge indicator, not solid wood, just the top. So if we would have sanded it down too far, we wouldn't have that beautiful wood on there. And now to make it nice and smooth, I'm gonna take this 800 grit sandpaper and just wrap it around my little finger sander, and we're gonna go over this to make it smooth like butter for us to make a brand new DIY out of. We are finally at the good part. Sometimes prepping is like such a pain in the booty. Oh, look at that, I forgot something. And of course, I continue to forget that Dollar Tree has been stepping up their game with attaching things. So here I am, because they have put these staples in this sucker, trying to pry the twine off of here by any means necessary. Those suckers were in there. But in all seriousness, it's a good thing that they're, you know, putting their stuff together better. Here is one of the beautiful napkins that we're going to be using to decoupage onto this piece. And one thing I really love about this napkin is each square has a different design on the background. It's like the same front background, you feel me? But the back has a different design. And since I'm asked constantly about layering and matching napkins, this is the second napkin we're going to use on here. We're going to tear both of these apart, put them together on our beautiful cutting board. And this napkin has the same exact design on 4 squares. To get us started, we are going to tear a little corner here to reveal the sneaky layers and rip them suckers right on off, so we just have our top decorative layer. And then we are going to use a little bit of water on a paintbrush to really give us a nice specific design. You can tear your napkin. I love doing that as well. But whenever you're doing details and you're using things like tissue paper or a napkin, since they're super thin, water can help guide you to get a precise design. Just make sure when you're using a napkin specifically, you wait for the ends to dry, that you have water on. If you do not, while you're trying to apply that with the Mod Podge or whatever you're using as your medium, it's possible that sucker is going to rip or cause issues. So, you know, wait 10-15 minutes, make sure all your little edges are dry from the water. To apply our napkins, we're going to use some cling wrap, and this is just a Great Value brand. It's a knockoff. It isn't even the actual name brand. And we're going to be using some sponges. I use these all the time and get asked all the time, what sponges do I use? These exact ones. And we don't even need a whole sponge, because it's been my experience that if I use the whole sponge, it actually gets in the way. So I'll cut them in half and just use half the sponge. And people, a little tip, after about 7 to 10 uses, this is going to get a little crusty musty. I will cut these up so I can use them for stencils and textured effects. Just a little tip, you know, waste not, want not. And we are going to be using some Mod Podge and fan brush to apply our napkin. It's my favorite thing to actually use as an applicator whenever I'm doing napkin decoupage DIYs. There are a lot of ways you can create decoupage art, and as a crafter, a DIYer, or an artist, I like to believe that we all find what works for us through one means or another, whether it's school, a knack for it, YouTube. And really, I truly believe that there's no right or wrong way to go about it. Just create something that you love, and as long as it makes you happy, that's all that matters. It doesn't have to be perfect. Whenever it comes to decoupage, I like to believe less is more, because napkins are super easy to destroy. Super easy. So usually I will place my napkin down in one section, and I'll either start at the top, the bottom, the side, the middle, whatever works for me at that time, depending on the project. And I will go little by little, section by section, applying a small amount of Mod Podge, using my sponge to press it down, because the Mod Podge seeps up through the napkin. The sponge, since it's dry, it's grabbing that, and then you can take your cling wrap and go over it, smoothing it out. And before I get the iron-on method people of the world talking about how that is the best way to get the most wrinkle-free application, you are so right. It absolutely is. But I talk about this a lot in my content. Doing it this way is quickest for me because I have to make content for you. The iron-on method requires drying and waiting and waiting. With this, since I'm applying such a thin layer, it dries really quickly and I can continue making whatever I'm DIYing. There are a couple ways you can go about layering napkins. For this particular project, I really wanted that cascade of hydrangeas that is going upwards to kind of meet right underneath of our little yellow Tweety bird that we have up here. So I just took some more water on a little paintbrush and just kind of trimmed it in such a way that it blended together. Now you might be asking yourself, Brandy, why didn't you just paint the background and then apply your napkins? Well, there's a couple ways you can, like I said, decoupage, and I wanted the wood background to kind of blend into the napkins to make these look like they just went on the board. And keep in mind, whenever you're decoupaging a napkin or tissue paper and it's really thin, you can see whatever the background is. It'll be fairly translucent. So if you pick the color of your background that is sort of similar to your wood grain, it'll look really flawless. And this goes without saying that if you iron it on, it's going to be even more flawless, okay? Once I was happy with the application of the napkins, I decided to take some more cling wrap and just kind of go over. There were some little sections where I got a little extra with the Mod Podge and really just wanted to kind of smoosh it out. And the cling wrap helps accomplish that. I let this dry for about 20 to 30 minutes, but if I'm recommending getting to the next part to you, I would say wait a couple hours, okay? Don't be a rebel like me. Be patient. It's not easy. We're now going to take some of this distressing texture paste and put some stencils on here. But I also want to add a little bit of color because I want everything to kind of match our napkins. So I'm taking a little, bowl here and taking just a tiny bit with my tool. And you don't have to use one of these tools. I've showed it before. You can use a spoon, whatever. It doesn't have to be a fancy schmancy little plastic tool that costs like 99 cents from Ross in a little pack of like mixed things. Don't let me perpetrate like, I'm not fancy, y'all. I'm not, okay? I'm wing it and get it done. Now, I just mixed some colors together until I got 3 that made sense to me with the napkin colors and that I felt I could also blend to get a little bit more colors. You want to make sure that before you do anything like this, you want to try and tape it down. So I used some painter's tape and then held my pointer finger on my left hand at the top of where I wanted it to start and then worked my way down. And I used primarily this color and took some of the other colors and smooshed it in there to give us a little bit of variety. I felt like it matched the hydrangeas, it matched some of the red and the truck, or it's a truck, it's a car. And it just kind of blended on down with our little stencil here. And ooh, look how pretty. And it dried like that. It really did. It dried like, well, you'll see in just a second. I decided to take some butterflies because we had some butterflies in one of our little napkins. And I had different stencils with different butterflies. And since I didn't want to put anything on the handle part, I wanted to actually leave the handle as a whole. I put them going up the handle in different colors. And because I cannot leave well enough alone, I grabbed some stamps. Some were Dollar Tree stamps, some off Amazon I had, and just put some in different little sections. Allow this to dry a day and then put whatever sealer you want to put over this. Napkins can be tricky applying them to glass, and if you want those designs to really pop, try this idea. Just pick out your napkins and your glass piece, then just rip up the napkin and put the bike right in the center, okay? We're not doing anything difficult here, just slapping some Mod Podge on that joint, and look how beautiful it is. Well, it's not beautiful enough because I want this to pop out a little bit. So in order for us to do that properly, you want to make sure that you let this dry and then apply another layer of Mod Podge on the back of it. Let that dry, and then you're welcome to come in with your white paint. Yep, all the drying, okay? Let it dry. I know what you're thinking, Brandy. Why did we have to wait for the napkin to dry before applying more Mod Podge? Listen, it's been my experience that if you don't wait for the initial decoupage napkin piece to dry and you just try to put a sealer right over it, especially a large section, it's going to rip or smoosh. You know what I'm saying? Look how pretty. I love this piece. Next, I'm taking this other napkin and I really just want the florals. I love how big this napkin is and all the amazing designs on this. I also didn't want the like very edge parts of it, so I pulled them off and then made sure to rip in precise spots of the flowers that I wanted. I also decided to just leave the end translucent, so this way the center of the napkin really pops out, and then the florals on the outside are just sealed with that Mod Podge, and it gives you a little bit of a contrast from one to the next with the look when you're staring at the plate. I love this piece so flippin' much. I cannot wait to show you the last project and what they look like together. Don't forget that napkins can transform even a piece of trash. If you're anything like me, you're like, ooh, Brandy, I don't eat those cookies. But me, I have some people in my house that love these cookies, so I had this tin laying around. Well, I got more than one, but we're only going to DIY this one, and for now, just the lid. And it's a little wonky, but we're going to worry about that later, and for now, we're just going to take some white chalk paint and paint this sucker on up. And people, I do want to let you know that this chalk paint, even though I recommend using this over anything else, it still comes off easily if you don't have time to let this sit and dry, just in case you want to sell this or give something like this as a gift. So it's a good idea to put a layer of clear matte spray paint on here first, or use some Mod Podge before you put your chalk paint on, and then even seal over the piece just to ensure this is going to last. We're turning this lid into a tray, and I was just going to pop some beads on here and call it a day. However, obviously this is wonky, so we have to figure something out to stabilize it. So it took me a second, and I figured if I take this little square and then our little circle base thingy, it was going to work out. So I grabbed my Gorilla Glue gel and decided we're going to use this along with some hot glue. And of course, this is almost out. I like buying the little tubes because whenever I buy the big ones, they just end up drying out quicker than what I can use them. And people, it goes without saying, be careful when you're using this stuff. Ah! Shit. I got glue on me. Ah. If that happens to you, make sure you get it off ASAP, because that stuff will have your skin sticking together and it is just not fun. I added some hot glue to get that immediate hold, and then I popped some more of the same onto our circle piece and attach that to the bottom of our little square here. The square piece really gave me a nice flat sturdy surface, and then our little circle piece gave us that elevation for the tray look. Now it's time to bring in our napkin. We're gonna decoupage this. Are you shocked? You shouldn't be. And if you ever wonder about any napkins that I use in my content, I do sell napkin bundles on my website. Make sure to get those sneaky layers off underneath of your decorative layer. This one was giving me some trouble, people. I'll tell you what, those sneaky layers were really stuck onto this top decorative layer. And whenever you're decoupaging something that has a lip, it can be a little frustrating because you want to get that pattern from side to side. So what I did for this is I just took some water once I pressed this in here to line out around the inside of our circle, and then I just pulled it apart. If you do this very gingerly, it ensures that you get a nice fine line where you have that water. Try not to oversaturate your brush because it will spread more, and then you'll have more of the napkin that you're able to rip. I also decided to take some more of the decorative sections on the napkin and cut them off so I could attach around the lip on the outside of our little tray here. I do not usually cut a napkin whenever I'm going to decoupage it. I feel like tearing blends in much better, but since our lip is super tiny and it's actually pretty straight, cutting it just made the most sense. I'm taking a fan brush and I'm using just a little bit of Mod Podge Less is always more whenever you're doing a napkin, because too much will create huge bubbles, and it also is super easy to seep through because napkins are pretty porous. And if you're not using a wood or a fabric surface, there's really nowhere for any of the Mod Podge to seep into but the napkin or out the sides. I repeated the same technique for the top of the tray with the napkin, only I did this section by section. Because I'm using such a light layer of the Mod Podge, it will dry super quick. So you need to make sure that you're either moving fast if you're going to put Mod Podge all over the whole entire thing, or you need to make sure that you put enough Mod Podge on there that it's not going to dry in different sections, so you have some pieces of the napkin sealing or not if you choose to Mod Podge the whole thing at one time and it's a fairly large surface. So I like to just do little by little. I used a piece of cling wrap and my dry sponge to apply this. I let this dry for a few hours. I sealed over it and took some silver gilding wax to go around those edges. This turned out super flippin' cute. Get a little eccentric with your next napkin piece. Listen, this idea is a little eccentric and I've maybe only done 2 styles of decoupage like this twice, not this exact thing. It's not going to be for everyone, but some of you are going to love it just as much as I do. We're going to create a look with this and get a little artsy fartsy that's going to seem like the vase piece itself is being broken open to reveal decoupage underneath. And people, this is that multi-surface paint. I absolutely love this. 3 coats on this. I did leave some areas where you can see at the bottom there's some brush strokes there, so you can see through a little bit. If you want it to be a little bit more solid, obviously do more. You'll see why I left it like this later. Here is the beautiful napkin that I picked for this project, and I want to get the little, you know, bumpy bits off the bottom here. So I'm just using the water and a paintbrush to get a nice precise line. And then I'm also doing the same thing to kind of go around the florals here to get a nice precise line of different ways I want the florals to go, because I'm going to piece this together. Since it's large and it's round, I want it to make sure that this kind of all went up and down instead of like tilting sideways, which is what usually happens if I just try to wrap the napkin around the piece. And I do want to mention that if you need your whole napkin and don't want to get rid of those little bumpy bits on the edge, you can iron or press them and they'll flatten out. Even if you Mod Podge them, honestly, depending on the surface, you can't really notice them. Once you're all finished with that, this is where things go a little sideways, okay? Let that dry and then grab you some tissues. Now, I've used fabric and I've used paper towels to do this before, and I've used tacky glue once, and I use Mod Podge. Okay, so I'm taking a little bit of water and about 2 tablespoons of Mod Podge, and I put them in the water. I want it to look like this is kind of ripping above the decoupage, like being pulled open to reveal something. So I'm taking 2 different colors to make a brighter, more dominant color than the napkin. Like everything's kind of blending into this. Then we're gonna take our napkin and just start dunking it in there, squeeze out the excess, and tappity tap 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 in all around where that napkin that we decoupaged on there ends. And people, believe it or not, this is sticking on here. You know, I'm making sure that the napkin that I'm dipping in there isn't overly saturated. Let me just side note, okay? I think it's really funny how I started off the video as I'm editing and I'm like, I got gloves on. And here, where obviously gloves would be great, I decided to be like, muck it. And I'm just knuckles deep in that water there. I've been living with dyed blue fingers for 2 days. Anyhow, let this dry overnight, okay? It's gonna need it. And then it should look something like this. And it's gonna be crusty. If you touch it, it's gonna be stiff. And like I said, you could use tacky glue to put in the water as well. That would work. Or some fabric stiffener. That'll probably do a great job too. So obviously we can't leave it like that, right? We got to blend it in there, make it look like a vase at some point. So I'm going to take some calcium carbonate and some joint compound with a little bit of paint to give us a textured paint. I'm taking some colors to blend up to try to match the color of the napkin. And please keep in mind, the way I'm doing the color variations is completely up to my preference of how I want to create this piece of art. You guys do your art vase however makes sense for you. I, again, am going for the look of this being kind of ripped open to reveal a beautiful piece of decoupage under the vase. Also, you don't need a fancy schmancy like clay mixing thing like I have here. You could use a spoon, a popsicle stick, it does not matter. I just happen to have that sitting right on hand. I pick up these packs all the time from Ross, so I have these laying around. Once I had that all mixed up, I then took this blue mixture and just dabbed, tappity tap tap tapped everywhere, all over the napkin, all the way up to like the neck of the vase, because I'm gonna kind of create an ombre look at the very top. And I even took some of that color and popped it in around the napkin, so it looked like this was really all one piece. The colors just blended in. I then mixed a little bit of white with the textured paint, or textured joint compound, and the carbonate, so that was also textured, and met them in the middle of the neck of this vase and gently blended them together. I let this completely dry, which took a few hours, and then came back in with that textured white paint and just dry brushed over everything, even some spots on the napkin. So real quick before we get to the reveal, remember how when I initially showed you the way I painted the vase, I said I only did a couple layers, and you could see at the bottom that there were some brush strokes. So obviously we have our decoupage portion on there, and there's more paint that I'm putting on the top right now. So if you were to put some fairy lights or a little tea light, you're definitely not going to see anything popping through the top, because we have even more layers on the top now. However, that's not going to be the case for the decoupaged portion. I absolutely love how this piece turned out. It's so unique and creative. It's just a different way for you to be a little artsy fartsy with your decoupage and your glass decor. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think of it. As always, thank you all so much for hanging out with me today, and until next time.